Hey everyone, this time around, we're trying to figure out what is the workflow of Autodesk Inventor and our 3D modeling. So we have some questions to try and solve that. What does workflow actually mean? First, we got to figure that out. What is the workflow of our program of 3D modeling with Autodesk Inventor? Also, what do the icons look like for those different steps, the different steps of the workflow? So in terms of what does workflow mean? So in a program or with just building something, doing all kinds of different things, you can apply workflow to. It's the order that you do the work in. It's what do you start with, and then you somehow some stuff happens in between, and then you get the end result. So it's kind of like what happens in between. So if we look at this picture here, this is kind of like you call it a flow chart. So you start somewhere, and then a progression of things happen. Another example would be like with video editing. Generally, the first thing you do with creating a video or video editing is you need to plan out what you're making, you get the shots, and then you edit it together. That's the workflow. With our program, with 3D modeling, our workflow is going to look like this. So what we start with is we first start with making parts. If you think about it, that should make sense. We don't start with making a drawing. We can't make a drawing or a blueprint of something if we don't have something to make a blueprint of. Seems kind of obvious, but again, I just want to explain this to make sure it 100% makes sense. So with our 3D modeling program, the first thing that we start with, let's start with making parts. And this is the file that we use to make parts, individual parts. Notice it says part right here, and then the name of the part file is standard.ipt. It says standard because there's the other option of sheet metal, which we're not really going to deal with. IPT, when I think about that, the PT stands for part in my brain, and I'm assuming that's what it stands for. And if you look here, it's just one single box. So it's like one part. So then after we create parts, we can do a couple things. Generally in here, what we'll do is after we create a part, then we move on to an assembly. We assemble multiple parts together. For example, on like a turbine blade, you make the blade part and then you make the dowel and then you assemble those parts together. So this generally for us will be our second step of the workflow. And if you notice, it says assemble. It says assemble right here. And if you look at the icon, it's three boxes. So if we look at this is one single box. This is three boxes. It's three boxes added together. It's like saying, hey, let's assemble those boxes together. Let's assemble those parts together. And again, we got the word standard because we're not really dealing with the welding type stuff. And IAM. AM to me, think about that, stands for assembly. After we make assemblies, then we generally will make a blueprint or a drawing. That's what Autodesk Inventor titles the blueprints. And that's how you get this view here. This is what a drawing looks like. And if you look at this icon, if you look here, this would be like a front view of this assembly. This would be a top view of this assembly. And this would be a side view of the assembly. So what this is showing is like this icon kind of shows what it's about. This is about making a blueprint and getting those different views on there. So that's our basic workflow. Make a part, make an assembly, make a blueprint of it. Now, that is not always going to be the case. It depends on what you're making and how complex it is. If we make a part, we can go straight to making a blueprint. So if we make a part, we can just go right down to making a blueprint of that part right away, depending on what we're making. Usually if it's something complex, we want to do that. And what we might have is we'll have multiple blueprints. So if, let's say somebody's designing a cabinet. Well, they're going to have multiple blueprints. They're going to have multiple blueprints and one of those blueprints for each part. So then what that person can do is they can take those blueprints. Let's say they have one blueprint per part. They can take that into the shop, and it's kind of like their menu. It's like, hey, I need this part, I need this part, I need this part, and it's got all their dimensions and views on there. And it's kind of like their menu or their to-do list of things that they got to make. Now, another thing that we can do is we can make multiple assemblies. We can have sub-assemblies. We can assemble assemblies together. Let's say you assemble I don't know, just a couple things together, 3 boxes, and then you need to assemble another 3 boxes. We can assemble those 2 assemblies together. And then we could also even make a blueprint of those assembled assemblies. So just to kind of give you an idea of how this works, it's not just make a part, make an assembly, make a blueprint. We can kind of go back and forth and throughout this. So just keep that in mind. And as our projects get more complex, you might be looking at assembling assemblies or making blueprints of individual parts and so on. Thanks for watching.